They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are more than just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Tonight on Rogueways, we are in for a super treat as we dive into all of our favorite topics with someone who is plucked from the ether for a special life path to help unveil the truth of our reality. He has written Master of Reality and experienced extra-dimensional psychic phenomena and more while unraveling the aspects of existence that boggle the mind of many. From aliens to UFOs to time travel, Mark, I am so sorry. I actually am not sure how to pronounce your last name, so you might have to correct me when I say Fiorentino.
That's perfect.
Yay!
Fiorentino.
Mark
Very
Fiorentino
good.
is here to blow our minds. And how are you doing tonight, Mark? It is so good to have you here on Rogueways.
Fine, thank you. I'm doing well.
Excellent. Well, before we jump in, I do want to give thanks to every single person out there who watches, listens, shares the show with people, hits the like button, maybe gets super chats, tips, or stops by the Rogueways shop to support the show or more, or if you're in Telegram, if you're on Locals, if you're anywhere where the show is or interacting, much love to you, gratitude to you, thank you for all you do, thank you for being here and for being you. And now, Mark, the pointless question of the episode for you is, what is your favorite musical instrument and why?
Oh gosh, it's always been a battle between the guitar and the piano.
Wow.
And I go back and forth between the two. I'm probably going to say guitar because I used to play guitar a long time ago.
Which was your first?
Pardon?
Which was your first instrument that you loved, the piano or the guitar?
Yeah, the guitar is definitely the one.
The one. Did that lead you towards the piano? Because usually I feel like people learn the piano and then they start going off into other instruments, but...
I never really learned the piano. I had all these good intentions based on a song that was very popular when I was young. What was the name of that song? We skipped a light fandango. What's the name of that song? I can't think. It's a real kind of interesting. It's an organ song, and Whiter Shade of Pale. Oh. I love that song. So that got me interested for a little while in the piano because I just love that melody so much. But mainly guitar because I got to play it and then sing songs, and I used to go to a music party, and I even hosted it a couple times way back in the day, back in Charlotte. So guitar, it's going to be guitar for me.
That's cool. I love that you would hold it so you're feeling all of it as you're playing it. It's a cool instrument. I'm super fascinated by organs too. I want to, I don't really want to learn how to play it, I guess. I want to have someone just explain all the aspects to me while they're playing it. That's what I want.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll jump into it. I know that this maybe all started for you in your childhood, which is usually where I go with people anyway, but for you it was specifically concerning Albert Einstein. So tell us about your childhood and Albert Einstein.
Sure. It all started when I was going to catechism. I was a Catholic, and the nun there asked us to find a saint born on our birthday. And this is back in 1965, no internet, no easy access to doing searches and so forth to find something like that. Even today, finding one on March 14th, 1955 is just not easy. I didn't find any saints then, still today. But back then, all I could do was ask my parents, and we had a calendar hanging in the kitchen. I walked over to it and looked at it, and I saw Albert Einstein's birthday was on my birthday. So I went over to the Encyclopedia Britannica and started reading about him, and which eventually got me into the unified field theory and started a lifelong interest in science in general. especially physics, because physics really was about the way things work, right at the foundation. And that's what I really liked and was interested in. I wanted to know how things worked. When I read about the unified field theory, I thought this was the best idea I've ever heard in my life. And I just kept reading, hoping I would read about it someday, and this discovery would be made. But it never happened until I wrote the book, which was kind of a surprise even to me. But I did manage to work it out with the math, which I'm about to release and upload to a journal website. So I'll have a proof for the for the unified field theory. And as it turns out, Einstein was on the right path. He was always right about this. We should have never abandoned him, but they did. And I take up the banner in honor of his memory. I'm bringing it forward. I'm finishing this battle once and for all.
Wow. You share a birthday with him, so maybe you were always meant to do such work. But the unified field theory, just to remind people, is this idea that what's happening at these tiny, tiny little subatomic levels should be somehow united with or understandable alongside these giant bodies that are moving through the solar system. Is that correct?
Well, it's even simpler than that. In Einstein's mind, it was, and back in the early 1900s, late 1890s and so forth, it was really about electromagnetism and gravity emerge as aspects of a single fundamental field. So let's break that down a little more, because I want you to have a clear idea in your mind what exactly was going on in their minds in that time. Okay. So what I did was, in that statement, you could really look at that statement, electromagnetism and gravity emerge as aspects of a single field, as a formula of sorts. But what I did was I deconstructed electromagnetism back into its primary foundational force fields: the electrostatic field, the magnetic field, and the gravitational field. So we need to really unite these three fields. And when I went through it and worked it out, it became remarkably simple, the solution. Electrostatic fields are a twist of space. And because of their structure, they move within space automatically, autonomously. And because of that motion, whenever a charge moves, and we know this for sure, this has scientifically been established, whenever an electron moves, a magnetic field emerges from that motion. So, and what a magnetic field is a torsion field. It's a rotation around the charge as it moves. So the charge is a twist of space, and as it moves, of course, the space is going to rotate as that twist goes by. So there is 2/3 of the unified field theory already solved. And that was way back in the time of James Clerk Maxwell, back in 1870s, in that area, with the help of Michael Faraday just before him. They already united electromagnetism. The motion of charge makes magnetism. And then all that was left was gravity. Gravity was tricky because it really didn't have a pole, but it's a bending of space, just like an electrostatic charge is a twist of space. That's a certain mechanical state of space, the ether, which is something they believed in that time. So everything is made out of the ether. These force fields are bendings of that ether. The electrostatic field is a twist, the magnetic field is a rotation, and the gravitational field, the tricky one, is a contraction of space. And so what I did in my book is I found the cause, the mechanical cause of gravity, which happens as a result of unbalanced charges moving in an accelerated fashion. Whenever this happens, they have an acceleration factor that creates a contraction. And that contraction is the gravitational field. That means we've unified the three forces of nature now. it turns out to be that simple. And I have the math that was over 200 and something years old. I changed the way they worked it, the scale of it, from the very large to the very small. And I was able to prove and predict the masses of particles using simple Newtonian math.
Wow.
So that's unified field theory, just bringing those three fields, explaining how each one works and how they, become one from the other and back. And then that led to anti-gravity later on in my life.
Wow, which is also a huge deal. But even gravity is like a sticky point for some people now, because some people, you may know, don't believe in gravity anymore. And what would you say to people about gravity's existence and how it relates to, if you're familiar with the flat Earth idea of buoyancy and density instead of gravity and that whole thing?
Well, I think the idea of buoyancy and density is very good, because it comes into play in my theory. That doesn't mean gravity doesn't exist, but back in the day, they were into something called the ether, and the ether is that fundamental field. It's the field when there's no bendings, there's no force applied to it. It's just flat Euclidean space. That's all it is. Only when we apply a force to it, when it bends, do we see these other fields like gravity or magnetism. So there is a density factor, and the buoyancy factor is what I worked on that led to the discovery of the slip wave field, which is how particles move, which is incredibly important for understanding a unified field theory. You must have a cause of motion. And up until now, scientists ignored the cause. And even Einstein in special relativity ignored the cause, and they have kinematics, which is basically, we're going to use motion, but we're going to ignore the cause of that motion. And all our math is going to be, something has momentum, let's not talk about how it got it.
It's like a dirty secret.
And so that's how they got around that problem. They just decided they weren't going to talk about it. Well, that's important, because particles having motion, it breathes life into the universe, makes mass, makes energy, everything that we see today. Without motion, we're in trouble. And particles and forces in motion are critically important.
I remember it's reminding me of a scene in Black Hole. It's a movie with Nassim Haramein, and maybe you're familiar with him and his work as well, which we could maybe talk about. But he brings up this point where he was looking at this diagram of the universe expanding, and it's like a guy blowing into the universe to blow up this balloon. And he's like, yeah, but who's the guy? Like, where's this coming from? What's causing this motion to happen? And same sort of idea, like, why are we ignoring part of this equation? So it's really interesting. Why were they ignoring the cause of motion or the instigation?
Because they didn't know, and they were. I think they're just trying to cover up their ignorance on that matter. Why they ignore that the speed of light is slowing down? It's slowing down, and there's ample evidence of that. And the person who discovered it, Barry Setterfield, has been ignored, and. At one point, they've been measuring the speed of light for many years, for all the way since 1729. And as they measured it over all these years, gradually it's slowing down. And after a while, Raymond Burge, who was the chairman of physics department at the University of California, decided that, hey, we've had enough of this. He's the arbiter of the values of the atomic constants, and science, we're not going to put up with the speed of light slowing down, because if that's slowing down, then we have to admit things that we don't want to have to admit, like, well, what's causing the speed of light to slow down must be the medium it's going through, but we've already decided that that medium doesn't exist. So now we're in a sticking place. Not only that, but then all the other constants are probably shifting too. So basically what he did, I guess in the 1940s or so, He said, I'm picking a number. That's the number everybody's going to use. That's what everybody here has told me they want. And that's the way it's going to be. And from that time on, the speed of light became constant, because what they did back in the 70s, starting in the 70s, is basically they decided, well, what we're going to do is tune the equipment to this number. We won't start measuring until we set the equipment to this number so that we get this measurement. So what they're doing is shrinking and enlarging the distance to get that number. And then when they get it, they used to use a fixed distance of 1 meter, but they decided for some strange reason, it kept lowering, it's slowing down, but that made sense in my theory. And that's a whole nother topic in cosmology we could get into, but why the scientists cover up stuff like this? Because it doesn't fit their model, and they're not comfortable with adopting new ideas. And it's a shame, because it's never good science to ignore anomalous data.
Yeah.
You just can't do that, or to eliminate a conclusion because of some presupposition. And that's exactly what they're doing. And for reasons, only they can answer themselves personally. But this is not good science. It's kind of a cover-up. And everybody knows about it. They're not even really covering it up. They're not denying it. But we don't know, because I've discovered why the speed of light is that number. And I can tell you very easily. It's because of Maxwell's discovery that speed of light c is equal to 1 over the square root of permittivity times permeability. Those are two aspects of space, properties of space. If space were made of nothing, they wouldn't have properties, but obviously space is made of something because it has these properties. In free space, way out in the middle of nowhere, way beyond planets or wherever you want to go, there is a property of permittivity and permeability. And as long as those stay constant, the speed of light stays constant. But if those change, then speed of light is going to change. And so they must be changing. And I know why, because planet Earth, our solar system, our galaxy, the Milky Way, Andromeda, and a whole bunch all around us are being pulled toward something called the Great Attractor, which is a huge gravitational source, probably a gigantic black hole. We already know this. Astronomers are complaining that nobody's listening to them, but they've mapped it out. Clearly, that's what's happening. And that's why the speed of light is slowing, because we're entering a gradually increasingly strong gravitational field. And we know for a fact, proven by Einstein and the people that talked and tested this, that when a light enters a gravitational field, it slows down. So it's slowing down here because that gravitational field that we're being pulled to is increasing gradually over time. So it all makes sense. It all fits together, and it's all ignored and covered up.
It's so insane that they ignore and cover up anything. And I've heard this before too from Rupert Sheldrake, that these constants that we rely on are really not constant at all. But like you said, that if you bring that up or if you focus on that, people just, nope, push it away. We're not dealing with that because we don't know how. And I'm like, well, maybe we could figure out how. Maybe we shouldn't ignore it.
People have gotten fired over this. The guys that said that the speed of light, the neutrinos were going faster than light, look what happened to them. It turned out to be a system error. But you're on shaky ground if you mess with the speed of light. Nobody wants to hear it speeding up, and nobody wants to hear it slowing down. And you better be a fortunate son if you're going to go that route, because they're going to attack you. But, the evidence is there. I'm going with it. It establishes more proof and a greater direction for the cosmology and of the super relativity theory, which basically says the universe is not expanding, it's collapsing. And the accelerations of those galaxies that they saw, Hubble and those guys back in 1998, not Hubble was not in 1998, but they proved So they kind of proved his theory in 1998, and they won the Nobel Prize saying the universe is expanding. But those accelerations of those greatly distant galaxies are caused not by a mysterious force of dark energy, which has never been proven to exist, but by a known force of gravity. They're falling toward black holes everywhere, and they've spotted them and they've mapped them. So the accelerations are now explained in my theory. And we're not expanding, we're collapsing. The universe is on the end phase.
Mm-hmm. Am I totally insane that brings me some sort of strange relief? Like, oh, good. Like, that'll be great.
Well, it's all going to happen the natural way. It's the natural way for this universe to end. And that's okay, because it's going to be reborn. Right. Once all the mass and energy is contained back into the supermassive cosmic egg, there is a critical point that happens. I call it the Fiore threshold, which the density becomes so great inside of this object, which is hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of light years across, from the core outward. The neutronium, which is what my theory says black holes are made of, it gets so dense, and then it starts to radiate this heat so intense that it undoes the black hole. It's a classic battle of the irresistible force versus the immovable object. Mm-hmm. And the force wins because the irresistible force is what the immovable object uses to create its gravitational strength. And it is disturbed by this concentration of matter to the point where it heats up trillions of degrees. This is what, look at this thing. Take a look at that. Oh, wow. This is a trefoil. If you want to know what's going on inside of the neutron and the proton, that's what's going on. Those are the quarks. They're moving at 99% the speed of light, the three of them, which forms this solid dynamical object, which is the cause of the gravitational field, because it's accelerating rapidly. Unbalanced fundamental charges accelerating in this way, because this type of motion is accelerated motion. A lot of people don't know this spherical or this anything with angular momentum. That causes gravity. And so I know there's a lot of stuff going on here right now, but I'm trying to rapidly pour in all this information to the people out there, because I'm hoping some people are going to say, hey, I think this makes sense. And I think he's on to something, and we should look into it more. And that's what I'm going to try to get people to do when I want them to look into anti-gravity. Since the way to, if you want to know how anti-gravity works, you first have to figure out gravity. Once you really know how it works, anti-gravity becomes very clear and easy. If gravity is a contraction, anti-gravity must be an expansion. So you just simply have to figure out what particles move in what way to make a expanding field. Wow.
And is that easy? Is it low energy? Is it something that would be super hard to pull off? Like, how does it go?
Moderately hard. Obviously aliens do it. They're getting here. And so let's just talk about that. I discovered the slip wave, which is how the particles move. And, I have a diagram here somewhere. Where is that diagram? I don't know. I'd have to share it, but it's kind of a bit of a complex conical shape where you have a twist that's going like this. It starts very small, gets larger and larger as the negative charge grows. And that twist creates a pressure wave inside of the particle. And you'll find out if you just think about it. Pressure is what causes motion. Look around in nature. High and low pressure systems cause the winds. High pressure on the bottom of an airplane wing causes lift, well, along with low pressure on the top of the wing. Pressure inside of the pistons of motors causes the pistons to move. Pressure in water causes, in a hose, causes the water to move. Pressure, pressure, pressure. After looking at all these examples of pressure making things move, pressure differences, gradients, I discovered that it must be a pressure gradient inside of particles that cause them to move. And that's exactly what it is. It's a pressure density gradient. And so that is what I use to model how to build a UFO. You know, basically you need magnetic field. So your question is, you know, what kind of field? How do you do it? Does it need a lot of energy? Yes, it needs a lot of electricity, something we know about and we can do. All we needed is superconducting coils, which apparently the aliens have developed, and probably we have developed. I'm guessing room temperature superconductors are available, but was classified top secret. Why? Because if you have superconducting, you can do experiments to prove anti-gravity, and the government doesn't really want that. Why? I mean, because they have a strategic military advantage as long as they have the anti-gravity machines, which, by the way, can fly circles around our best jet aircraft and missiles. And literally, they've done that at Mach 1 or 2. They're going around us. So yeah, that's important that they keep that secret for as long as they can.
Which begs the question: is it aliens that are doing all these fancy things in the sky and all these stuff, or is it governments that are hiding the fact that they can do all these fancy things?
I think it's both. I think the aliens came here. Some of their craft crashed. We recovered them. We really got into that early in the mid 1940s. We reverse engineered, I'm sure, their craft. You know, you take it apart and you say, hey, there's coils of wire in here. What are these for? and they seem to be superconducting wire. Where did they get that from? You know, and then, you know, piece by piece, they were able to reverse engineer this, discovered that magnetism is key to anti-gravity. I mean, without it, you're not going to get any kind of anti-gravity motion. You can't float, and you can't get propulsion. You need the magnetic field configured in special ways to get both propulsion and, you know, cancel gravity as it is. And it's a beautiful system because not only can we do this, which is vitally important, but we can break the light speed barrier. That's even more important. Because if we don't do that, we'll never get off of this planet and see other star systems. We have to break the light speed barrier, which, you know, is something that's going to upset a lot of physicists because they don't like to think about the light speed being adjustable. And you do it by adjusting that equation I talked about with permittivity and permeability. And you do that with the magnetic field. Magnetic field can be used to reduce permittivity and permeability. And if you reduce those, the more you reduce them, the speed of light changes, it goes up. So if you go to zero, it goes infinitely fast, which people are claiming they've done in metamaterials. So all the science is there, and people are claiming this is backing up what I'm saying right now. They're backing it up with hard scientific evidence on ResearchGate and places like that where I read about this. So it's important that we break the light speed barrier, not just by a little bit, by tens of thousands of times, because we want to get to like Proxima Centauri. What's that? 4.2 light years away. Well, if we go the speed of light, it would take us here on Earth waiting for them to get there 4.2 years. That's intolerable. It's no good. We got to get there in 15 or 20 minutes. And that's doable with the slipwave spatial bias drive, which I described very thoroughly and in much detail in my book. And that's doable if we have the two technologies, a massive power source, and we need room temperature superconducting coils, because the ship has to be surrounded with these coils, because the entire vessel has to be inside of the inverse hyperbolic field, which is the anti-gravity field. If it's not, it's lethal. You get inertial leakage and the pilots will be killed when you do these, high-speed maneuvers like the UFOs do.
Yeah.
They can do that because they've canceled not only, gravity, but when you do that, since gravity and inertia really are kind of the same thing, you cancel inertia. And so when they're moving inside of the slip wave, it's like they're in this bubble and it's like they're stationary. Even though the ship itself is moving through space, the space has been thinned out, stretched out, the density has been decreased by so much that they don't feel any inertial drag, and they can withstand all these high-speed maneuvers as if they're just floating. And I wouldn't want to look out the window when they're doing that. It would make me very dizzy. But it's a perfect system. Once we invent anti-gravity, we'll be able to go to other stars, other planets, and we need to do that for the safety and security of people on Earth. We have to be on another place just in case something goes wrong here. And until we do that, we will not be safe. We can be extinct in a matter of days. All it takes is a big meteor, a terrible plague. There's so many ways, super volcanoes. We need to have this technology, and I'm going to help bring it to this world. One way or the other, I'm going to deliver this product.
I love it. What about it? If we're able to move that quickly and go that far, what about, are we going to slam through planets or stars or other things, or is that just easily calculated out of the equation?
That is a really good question, and people are starting to bring it up. That shows me you're thinking it through and saying and realizing, hey, it's really dangerous going that fast.
That sounds scary.
Because you can't use radar, right?
Right.
Because you're outrunning the photons.
Yeah.
If you're going 10,000 times the speed of light and you try to shoot a radar beam out there, you're leaving it behind. It's never going forward. It's not going to happen that way.
And every single body out there, if it's as we're told, is moving incredibly fast as well. I guess in relation to us, it all changes.
Apparently, it's doable. I would adopt a strategy. Let's say I wanted to go to Proxima Centauri or Alpha Centauri. What you don't want to do is you don't want to, accelerate beyond the speed of light or to the speed of light when you're still in the solar system, and you don't want to go through the plane of the ecliptic. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, it has everything to do.
All the planets are kind of on the same plane, orbiting around the sun. That's where all the planets are. That's where the asteroid belt is. Odds are you might hit something. So what you want to do is go 90 degrees from the plane of the ecliptic. You go up and then out. So you get into a void, an empty region. Then you can crank it up. After you've traveled sublight speed for, half a day or whatever. Once you're safely out, away from all the debris, which we probably should, we have deep space radar now. We track a lot of the asteroids and stuff. We've got maps where we're optically tracking them. So we have a good idea of what's around us here. But once we get out there, I doubt that there's anything between Alpha Centauri and here. Once we get out into deep space, probably what I would imagine our friends at the government have done is send probes first. If they make it and get back, then they didn't hit anything. And so it's probably safe for us to, go 10,000 times the speed of light. And there is some ideas I have about making a system so you can still see, because you're right again, when you're doing that kind of speed, things change around you. When you're looking ahead, everything goes black. Yeah. When you're looking behind, everything goes black. You're not going, it's because of the Doppler effect. All the light photons and the visible frequencies are all going to get super compressed to something you can't see. Wow. So you're looking out the window and it's scary looking. It's pitch black. And the only place you're going to see any light at all is at 90 degrees from your direction of motion. you'll see like a little thin band or like a rainbow looking like thing. And the faster you go, the thinner that band gets. So if you go 100,000, it's going to be just basically black all around you. And so you need a good star chart system. You probably should send probes first to plot the path out there. And then you need good star charts in your computer system. And then a sensing system that can interpret that compressed light and then put it on a video display. So all of a sudden now you can see the stars and they'll be moving by you just like in Star Trek, which they had that all wrong. 8, 9 times the speed of light, stars aren't going to be going by you. They'll be motionless. It'll take forever to get to them. You got to go 50 to 100,000 times the speed of light before stars are going by you like you see in Star Trek.
Interesting. That, speaking of Star Trek, that whole teleportation thing, do you think, I mean, this sounds better than that. It's not teleportation, but it's like more, it would be less risky than disassembling and reassembling everything, right?
I truly think that technology, as is described in Star Trek, is something that will never be achievable, not even by advanced, millions of years ahead of us. They won't do it that way. It's much simpler. If you want to, and I talk about Stargates, you use Stargate technology, which is a portal technology. So if you want to go from one place to another instantly, or another dimension from one dimension to another, or even another time, you use the portal system, whereas you don't have to disassemble all your atoms and reassemble them. Novel idea, it's kind of like a fax machine, but what you want to do is just your whole thing, your existence, your material substance, just simply walks into another room. The portal is a doorway between your room, your existence, wherever you are, and the place you want to go. So that would be the equivalent to the Star Trek teleportation system. You would just use it, and that's kind of what they did in the Philadelphia experiment, if you're familiar with that at all. That was a very crude magnetic resonance system. There's those magnets again, that created a dimensional and time portal. And that's, once you know what you're doing, that's the way to go. Obviously, back in that time, they didn't know what they were doing.
No.
And that was a colossal mess.
Yeah. It sounds horrifying. People just like half stuck in walls and their minds never really come back.
I can't get that vision out of my head. When I first read that, I said, oh my God, that sounds horrifying. But it makes sense that would happen using magnets that way.
Do you think they've figured that out, or that's part of your whole way of looking at this new cosmology, is that you can establish portals, and do you think they're already doing that?
In my next book, because I was guided to write that portal of the Stargate chapter very late. I had really almost finished the book, and it was suggested that I write that, and I said, well, I'm going to have to figure it out. I'm going to have to. And I really didn't like time travel, going back in time. I have a great fear and anxiety about that. I just think it's wrong, morally wrong.
Right.
But what I found out, that there is a way to do it. And right at the beginning of the chapter, I say, if this technology is going to work, something is going to have to go faster than the speed of light. And so I had some keywords I could search on the mighty powerful internet. And, I couldn't have done any of this book without the internet. It's a marvelous tool for accumulating and, researching and gathering knowledge. I was able to find, as I mentioned earlier, a metamaterial, which you could use to shine light through this metamaterial, and it can go any speed, much faster than the speed of light. And that's what they're claiming is happening now. That's what we need to build a Stargate. You put that in the frame. And so you can literally, once the electromagnetic particles, usually photons, come out of that, they create a shock wave that tunes the space. It vibrates so high. It's the doorway that opens up into other dimensions, other times. And I would love to see the math and the computer that you can, dial, because you would tune this thing like a radio to go to other times or other dimensions or other physical areas. I think they would be fascinating to work with that machine. But yes, do I think we have it? I do believe we have it. And I came up with a crude design in my book. I'm sure they're using the same design, only much more sophisticated and so forth. But yeah, I do think, and the rumors are that the US government has Stargate technology.
Yeah, I've heard these rumors as well. And then that gets me started thinking about what are they actually doing with that? And if there's these alien beings who are coming to visit, then some are probably pretty cool and some are probably and then some are probably awful. And do you have any thoughts on that as well, and how that might connect with how they're using these portals?
Yeah, I haven't really studied aliens that much, but lately I've been, just because I'm curious, because it makes sense, like you say, there's going to be some that are really nice, advanced, friendly, spiritually, well adjusted, and there's going to be some that are cold, calculating, and they also know that there's a God. I think everybody, I don't care what creature you are, once you get beyond a certain state of evolution, you psychically can connect to the other side, which is my theory is an intelligent design theory. So obviously there's a creator, and that means there's a God. And let's get up to speed here. That's, let's stop scratching our head and wondering if there's a God. Of course there's a God. There is a creator. And if you want to know how things work, which I do, you ask that creator. And so I used other avenues, psychics and near-death experiencers, gathering information from them, very good information. And I'm certain there are some bad guys out there. That's what the Greys, I've heard they're nasty, the reptilians, very nasty. But there's the Nordics and some of these others that I've read about that sound very nice. I would very much like to meet these people and have a nice discussion.
Yeah.
Well, philosophy and such could be great advancement for humanity, and we need to get to that. We need to be able to, get to that Star Trek thing where we're all, we belong to. I think there's several federations out there. It's not just one. We need to join the nice one.
The good ones, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what worries me, is our leaders don't always seem so very good. And then if they're portaling around and connecting with other intelligences, like, I don't necessarily trust them to make the right choices.
Yeah, right.
But you talk about this guidance that you're receiving and connecting with God on the other side. And I'd love to hear more about that and what your understanding is of what's going on. And I don't know if you want to talk about all of the psychics and the various experiences you've kind of had to get into that, or...
All of that is going to be in the next book. This first book only had a little bit, one NDE experiencer who I was searching for the signature of God, which is what Einstein was looking at. What do I mean by this signature of God? I mean, he was looking for a dynamical geometry. This thing that I showed you here, that's the dynamical geometry. This was actually seen by an NDE person, Claire Dennis. And I thought to look for that because I listened to, I took his advice. I read a quote from him. He said, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind." And on top of that, what really got me into the idea of talking to God, or trying to communicate with the creator, is that he once said that, "I want to know how God created this world. I am not interested in this or that phenomena, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are just details." What I discovered is the details are his thoughts. And that gave me the idea. I said, look, I know he was looking for some sort of a geometry to explain gravity. So I'm going to look for it. And I says, if God wants me to know, or us to know, he'll send it through one of these people. And so now I'm thinking of this, knowing probably I'm getting this thought from a little guidance, a little infusion from the other side. So I said, I'll spend a week or two looking through NDEs for this dynamical geometry. And I know what I'm looking for because it'll be something that contains an element of 3. And as you can see, that trefoil is a 3 knot. And God is telling this woman, I created the universe. This is the way I do it. I do through, what's the words he used? Energy in motion creating mass. I am the source of the sun. This is all making sense to me. I get very excited. I contact this lady and I say, look, I know what this means. I know exactly what this is. This is what Einstein was looking for and is what I'm looking for. And I built my mathematical model around that object I just showed you. All these things link together. They connect to make a sensible theory, the theory of super relativity. So, but after, I wrote the book, I wasn't sure if I was right or not. Then something happened that said, oh, you're right. And I thought, the whole theory does make a lot of sense. And now I have the math to back it up. And so now I thought, well, all these strange things that you're wanting to know about, these supernatural things, these connections to mediums, these eerie miracles and such. I says, now I have a reason to write a prequel to the book I just wrote. And in there, it's going to be what I left out of this book, which I mainly did science, except for this one part where I talk about the NDE, and I spend like a couple of chapters on it because it's very important.
Yeah.
It's like Prometheus bringing fire to the earth. I try to tell, this is really important what you discovered, but she works with a quantum mechanics person who's an advocate of that, a mathematician, and he believes in nothing. So we didn't agree. I said, no, basically, and plus they kind of converted her into not being a believer in God. She's a near-death person that doesn't believe in God.
Wow.
That's really, well, she's agnostic because they're agnostic, the science guys that work with her. And so I left that group after a while because it just didn't make sense because, no, there is a world, there is a universe, there is an objective reality. I'm certain of it. And there's loads of evidence. You just got to open your mind to the evidence and acknowledge it. And some people don't want to do that. Some people want to keep everything very abstract.
Well, it's like you were describing about scientists pushing away evidence and experiences and things that don't fit. It's the same on the other side as well, where, people will do it with spirituality as well. When you first held that thing up, that was my first thought. I was like, oh, it's the Holy Trinity. Obviously.
Yes, that's right. You see that, the Irish.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see the symbol a lot. They were probably connecting on some sort of a spiritual level. This is the most important structure because it breathes life. And the other side calls this thing the breath of life. And without it, there's no matter anywhere. The sun, the stars disappear, Earth, the planets, it just goes all black. Matter exists because of this structure inside of this is what's going on inside of the neutron and the proton. Without those guys working, we have nothing. We truly have nothing. So it's vitally important to know how things work. That's why I call myself a metaphysician. I studied the nature of things. Yeah. That's what this first book was really all about. And part of that thing was knowing the creator. You can't leave the creator out of the creation. Doesn't make sense, and you won't get the right answer if you do. So it's important to get that in there, and that's what I've done, and I'm not apologetic for it. It's just, that's the way it is. Yeah. That's what the evidence points to. There's loads of it too, I gotta tell you. But there's a lot of people out there that have presuppositions. They want to ignore the facts because they don't fit their paradigm. I guess it's going to be that to some degree. Maybe someday it'll change.
No matter which faction or side.
Changing that is what we're doing here today. Yeah. We got to have these open and honest discussions, or it never even gets considered.
Well, talking
Thank
about
God that we.
yeah, talking about ignoring God and ignoring the Creator reminds me of that what you were saying earlier about ignoring like the cause of things or like what actually set the thing in motion, or it's a very
Right.
similar corollary just across to the other side. And that shape too, to go back to that Trinity shape, it's, I don't know what to call it, but it's like a Mobius strip in that like it never has a start or an end, right?
It's called a trefoil knot.
Trefoil knot.
Actually the simplest knot there in existence. It does everything that a neutron and a proton need, because the strong force, it comes from this design, not from a fake particle called the gluon that really doesn't exist in there until we smash the hell out of this structure. And then you get all these little spurious particles due to these collisions. And they've confused all of that with the simple geometry. If you don't disturb this geometry, it's held together. Look at it. It's a knot. That's the strong force. That's what holds it, the three particles together. When they're moving this fast, this becomes a solid structure, a continuous structure, even though there's three nodes moving around rapidly within it. And not only is it doing this, but it's spinning and rolling. And so what you get is a precession. The end result is a rotating sphere, a highly precessing rotating sphere. And that's exactly what you need to cause gravity. Einstein left us notes that described the acceleration factor is what you need. What I'm showing you here is how particles accelerate to cause a contraction, which causes the space in that sphere around the neutron and its proton at the perimeter to contract. And that's how you get a non-polarized force of gravity, because the poles, wherever they would be, are spinning around so rapidly, it just looks like there's just a smooth contraction all the way around the sphere of each and every neutron and proton in every element in every atom everywhere in the universe. It's a perfect system and it makes sense. And I have to give Einstein full credit because in his happiest thought, I could tell you about his happiest thought, which led me to looking for this design. He talks about how the importance of acceleration, and he works out a mind experiment. Actually, somebody else does. Paul Ehrenfest works out this design of this experiment that I'm talking about. And I think he might have got it from Max Born. But when Einstein read about it, he wrote like 8 or 9 papers on it. He got excited. He saw what nobody else saw. So let's look at this idea that they had, which leads me to the discovery of the mechanical cause of gravity. Einstein followed the line of reasoning that began with his happiest thought of his life. Still at the Swiss Patent Office, he conducted one of his famous thought experiments. Einstein imagined a circle spinning in space. The center of the circle did not move, but its circumference was moving quickly in a circular direction. Einstein compared what happens in several reference frames, a standard tool he had used in developing the special relativity theory. So we got some groundwork here that's going to back up this experiment that he's got in his mind. So now this next sentence is very important. He concluded, using his special relativity, that the boundary of the disk contracted as it spun. There was a force acting on the circle at the boundary, the centrifugal force, and its action was analogous to that of the gravitational force. But that same contraction that affected the outer circle left the diameter unchanged. Thus, Einstein concluded in a way that surprised even him. The ratio of the circle to the diameter was no longer pi. He deduced that in the presence of a gravitational force field, the geometry of space was non-Euclidean, which means it's bent, it's contracted. That was the key. And he said in the equivalence principle, somehow acceleration is equal to gravity. And Newton knew this as well, but nobody could figure out why acceleration caused gravity. Now, I just described to you the mechanical cause. It causes a contraction. And when you use little particles to do it, they contract around that spinning sphere, that spinning disk. So now you got a complete, explainable, understandable system that makes sense. You don't get this from quantum mechanics. They have a whole different theory. What I just described here is really about the action force. Action at a distance it really comes about as particles interacting with space. That's the important interaction. Whereas in quantum mechanics, it's all about particles interacting with particles. That's not high. That's too high a level. There's a lower level. It's what's going on in between the particles that's important. And those particles are made of force fields. Those force fields are continuous deformations of space. This is the area you want to study, not this area. This is just crude, banging particles together and, counting them and seeing how many we can get and then making equations to, well, this one does that. And, this has this role. And, a lot of fantasy stuff's going on here. A lot of Nobel Prizes, not a lot of good applicable, usable information that's going to lead to the advancement of humanity. We need to be studying the primary forces of space, and we need to acknowledge that space is a real thing. It's a continuous, quasi-elastic solid, just like Lorenz said, just like Maxwell said, just like Einstein said, just like Newton said. I'm on that team.
Yeah.
Those are my guys. I put them against anybody we got today, and they'll beat them. Those guys were right. We should have listened to them. We got off course with quantum mechanics, and hopefully I'm going to fix that problem and get religion back and merged with science because they belong together, because the source of everything comes from the creator. And I got loads of people that say just that. How about, like, let's say Father Rick Wendell, he had a near-death experience. Very interesting fellow, great speaker. And here's an example where God tells him, I'm the creator. He says this: all of this three-dimensional world is within God. There is nothing outside of God. Everything within this physical universe has to correspond to laws, and God set those laws. They are immutable as God is immutable. None of this, what we see and experience, is an accident. It is intentioned by God. And that's what I say all throughout my book. And I didn't even know about this guy when I was saying this. I said, God did this through the power of intention. But only an infinite and eternal being could do this. So all of this, the books behind you, your cells in your body, you are part of God. We're all a part of God. We're like individual thoughts or certain strings within a tapestry. And, God is the giant tapestry, and we are all the threads that go through it. And all our lives are the threads of our lives, our past lives, our future lives are the threads of our tapestry. So you can see this kind of a infinite and eternal thing going on here in directions. Everything that really makes sense. And when anybody gets to the other side, like Father Rick Wendell or anybody else has NDE, God tells them every once in a while, says, I created this. And it's really important that we acknowledge that. And so we can advance, because if we stay with our heads stuck in the sand, saying, no, there is no God, I can't prove it, I can't see him, he won't do what I say when I want, therefore he does not exist, that's not going to help anybody. We got to expand our minds to the truth and move forward. Just like the other aliens, we will someday hopefully stop being terrestrial beings and start being celestial beings.
I like that phrase and that idea a lot. What about ether? It's just like they're ignoring everything else, right? And this is one of the main places where I think we stumble and have our heads in the sand, is ignoring ether.
It's the ether story is a really interesting story. I mean, it goes back to the Greeks, but things really got interesting when Newton first came up with the idea, and they were discussing with Descartes, and some of these other people were having debates and whatever. And Maxwell really took up the ether banner and made great progress. His theories of Maxwell's theories of electromagnetism were based on an ether theory. Einstein, all the way up to 1905, believed in ether, along with Lorentz. And Einstein, this is a critical point in history, 1905. It's not only the year he comes out with special relativity and 4 other really big papers, special relativity being the biggest, but it was the same year that they were doing an experiment to detect the ether. Everybody thought for sure there was an ether. It just made so much sense for everything that we see and observe, that there had to be, a medium, a plenum that the particles are made of, the fields were made of. And they thought about it as being, at this time, a quasi-elastic solid. Well, what does that mean? Quasi means if you bend it, when you remove the bending force, it snaps back into place. Elastic means, well, stretchable. You can bend it a little bit. You have tiny movements you can do to it. And a solid's tricky. It just means something that is continuous, not something impenetrable like we think of iron or glass or steel. No, it's just something that's out there that's continuous. It's stretchable, it's bendable. You can make particles out of it, which is what they are, basically. Configurations of space, electromagnetic fields. And all this is sensible, and it fits nicely into the super relativity theory. And the ether is the foundation of my theory, as it was their theory. And then in 1905, the Michelson-Morley experiment failed to detect the ether. And I spent years thinking, damn it, why? There got to be an explanation for this. They didn't detect ether wind. They thought as Earth moved through space, the ether is standing still. And just like you're in a car and the air is standing still, and you put your hand out the window, you feel the wind as you go through it, that would be the same case with the ether. But the ether is a different kind of animal, and the device they used to detect the ether wind was incorrect. And finally, and it's even written in special relativity, that he says that the speed of light is constant, and it doesn't matter how you're moving, either toward it or away from it or receiving it or emitting it. The speed of light is independent because it's generated internal to the particle. So it doesn't get any of its motion from an external force. Let me give you an example. If I throw a hard ball, all of its motion comes from the force of my arm moving and throwing it. So it's going to slow down with the wind, as the friction slows it down, and so forth, because it has no internal drive to keep moving. But the photon is its motion is entirely caused from within it. So it doesn't matter if it's moving in a train and you take a flashlight and you shine it on the wall ahead of you. It's not the train speed plus the speed of light. It's just the speed of light. If you shine it back the other way, it's still the same speed. So that experiment could never have succeeded because the design of the experiment was wrong. But they had no idea about this in that time. And today you could still confuse physicists about this. They'll want to argue what I'm saying right now, but they know that the speed of light is independent of all emitting or receiving sources. They know that. They will agree to that, but they won't like the idea that it's because of its internal cause of motion that's doing that. And so no matter how many times they did the experiment, They did not detect the ether. That caused Einstein to change his wording in special relativity and abandon the ether for a short period of time. Because once he did general relativity in this experiment that I just described to you, he realized there has to be an ether because there's something out there bending. And you can't do that without something being there to bend. So he eventually came back to the ether. But it's very important that physicists get back on board with this and realize there is an ether. And but that goes against the whole thing. The same with the speed of light slowing down. Very uncomfortable with the ether. It's like blasphemy to them.
Yeah,
it really is. Some will even laugh. Some will get angry, and some will listen. It's just the way it is. You've got different people out there, but they're taught that the ether doesn't exist. So it's going to be a hard road to hoe to get that back up there again.
Yeah, it seems to me like there has to be an ether, and obviously I'm not a physicist, but it just seems like it fits. It makes sense. And I wonder what you think about this idea that we've talked about this before, where there's like ether would be like the prima materia or whatever, right? And then down from there would be plasma, and then down from there would be gas, and then down from there would be liquid, and then down from there would be solid, as like a slowing down almost of everything. Does that make sense to you? And
yeah,
okay,
and that's what we see. What you just described is verifiable. It's called refraction index. So if you shine light into outer space, it goes its fastest. Then when you shine light in the atmosphere, it slows down slightly. Well, the atmosphere has got particles in it, it's a little bit denser. And if you shine that light into water, it slows down even more. It's denser than air. If you shine that light into glass, which is denser than water, it slows down even more. It matches exactly what you just described, and it makes sense. Obviously, the speed of light is determined by the medium that it's going through. Yeah. So that means space must be a medium. Look at it this way. There's another argument. You can do a simple mathematical argument. Distance equals rate times time. If outer space equaled nothing, as many physicists and mathematicians like to say, how long would it take to travel 1 meter at the speed of light in outer space? If space were equal to 0, if you do the computation, you would find that it would take 0 time for the light, no matter what speed it was moving. This is their own math that I'm using to prove them wrong on this. You can't deny this math. There must be something real out there. There must be a real physical something for the speed of light to traverse. It takes 8.5 minutes for light from the sun to get to the earth. There must be something there in between the earth and the sun. The math proves it because it takes time. If the space were truly made of nothing, it would take 0 time for light to go anywhere. And that means even across the entire universe. We would be seeing time would fall apart. Time intervals would disappear. You couldn't have a time interval because it would take 0 time to travel any distance because there's nothing between you and whatever you're measuring. So it would take no time. But that's not what we see. The science does not confirm the existence of nothing.
Yeah. It's crazy to even think about that as a concept, but it's as weird as like the dark matter and dark energy idea to me, right? And I feel like they are just throwing that out because they're like trying to say it's not nothing, it's something, but it's things that we could like never explain or touch or measure or something.
Well, dark matter came about because they couldn't figure out how the galaxy, the spin, it didn't match what they predicted with the known mass that they have. So they said, there must be dark matter in this galaxy. There's something we can't see. Yeah, there is, but it's not a mysterious particle. It's probably neutronium spheres, loads of them that are out there. And they're not easily detectable. I mean, they're pretty much black, pitch black, especially when they turn into black holes. Then you really don't see anything. So that explains the galaxy mysterious rotation problem. Then dark energy came about because of the misconception that the universe is expanding. Then because they have to generate a particle because of quantum mechanics. Everything happens because of some sort of particle in that theory. And so, well, then there must be a dark energy particle, and somehow this energy particle causes space to stretch apart, which doesn't make sense. But of course, they've never detected the dark energy particle. They don't even know exactly what it would be and how to detect it, even if they could. So, yeah, these things were contrived. They were made up so that to try to explain something they didn't understand. And instead of getting an understanding, they've just confused the issue even more. It's very frustrating for the astronomers out there that have seen all these supergiant black holes guiding whole clusters of galaxies toward them. And some are moving in this direction, some are moving in that direction, some are moving. Hey, this is not an expanding universe. This is a collapsing universe. And forget the whole dark energy thing. The whole thing was based on an incorrect assumption.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, these things came out of nowhere because they seem to have a knack of doing that a lot. When they don't understand something, they say, we're going to give it a particle of the cause. And then we'll just make up a particle and we'll say it has these weird properties, which we've never observed. And everybody's fine with that. And the next thing you know, we're talking about it like it really exists.
Which is, that's the bizarre part to me, is that and it's just like psychology. It's just like emotional psychology. You know, when we look at people who are like trying to like stay with their abusive husband or something, they're like making things up. They're like, oh, no, like, here's how we know for sure he really loves me. Like, because they need to verify their beliefs instead of observe reality. And it's the same, but it's on this just amazingly different scale. Because I would think if you brought people these ideas that they would say, how elegant and how beautiful, let's look at this and let's try to see how we can advance from this, instead of clutching onto our old outdated ideas. But they don't, they fight it instead. And it just,
well, some I've had some people call me some names, and not a lot. I mean, so far it's been okay. I'm sure there's probably going to be rougher waters ahead, but this is my job. Nobody else really can do this. I mean, I wrote the book. I come up with the theory. I guess it's just something I got to do to finish this up. I just can't. My idea when I started is, I'll write the book, and that's my part. I did it. It's up to them to read it, understand it, figure it out, and do something about it. But then I came to realize that I got to promote this. I have to explain it. I have to push it forward. It needs that extra momentum, and it's my job, my responsibility. I accept it now. I'm going to do the best I can do that. And how can I do it? Is going to shows like yours and talking about it, and hopefully a few thousand people or a few million people, and a little bit here, 1,000 here, 1,000,000 there, whatever, will hear it, and it will cause people to take action. And the action I want them to take is, yeah, there's an ether. There is an objective reality. This is how gravity works. This is how anti-gravity works. And we need anti-gravity, and let's get to work on that. Since he proved all this other stuff, he's probably right about anti-gravity. And that's the kind of the direction I'm going through. And it's probably going to be tough because, there's a lot of people with a lot of paradigms and stuck in their minds. And, I just, it's fascinating just to see their wheels turning when you're talking to them, and even if they're argumentative, to see, what are you clinging to?
Yeah.
Why are you clinging to that so tightly?
I know.
It fascinates me.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I'm sure part of it is that feeling, well, maybe that's not for a lot of people, but for some people it's going to be that idea that you stated, that that it's a collapsing universe and that we're like being pulled towards these black holes, because that's going to terrify some people, whereas I was like, oh, that's a relief. Other people are going to be like, no, we can't, we're all going to die, and that's not a fun thought.
you're right, and it terrified me a little when I realized it, so I made an invention to fix the problem called a stellar converter. Although it's probably not a good idea if you really think about it, but I figured out a way to reverse neutron stars and black holes, because black holes in my theory, are really nothing but super dense neutron stars. They're the next stage of neutron star. And there is a way to do that using the slipwave spatial bias drive technology. If you come in contact with neutronium with an intense magnetic field, it basically comes unglued. And if you use a coil, and I show some pictures in the book, a coil, and you ease these down at the spinning, the neutron stars are spinning very fast. So you have to do it at the poles, and you charge these things with, a huge current. So you got this magnetic field. As soon as the magnetic field hits the surface, the neutronium comes apart and generates these huge neutron beams. And what's handy about that is neutrons do something weird that physicists have never understood and makes perfect sense in my theory. If you isolate a neutron by itself in outer space for 15 minutes, it turns into a proton and an electron. And do you know what that is? What is a proton and an electron?
An atom.
It's a hydrogen atom. And what do you need to build a universe? Hydrogen. And you need a lot of it. So you take the neutronium and you convert it back. It's stored so conveniently for use, again, to build stars. So you can basically dissolve down these neutronium spheres or black holes to the point where all their packed neutrons are released into outer space. They're isolated. They automatically turn into hydrogen. And now you have new stuff to build other stars, and you stop the collapsing universe.
It's almost
That's the theory.
It's almost like a puzzle. Like God was like, okay, we'll give you guys this little playground. Go out and see what you can do. And if you make it to the end, you could actually create your own universes too.
Yeah, we can prolong this universe, but then things get tricky, because if you get rid of the black holes and you stop the collapse, then you build stars which eventually die, and they become, brown dwarfs or neutron stars. And then without neutronium, you see, here, let's make this announcement. Obviously, there's a problem in astrophysics where they talk about how stars are formed. They don't really know. If you ask an astrophysicist, how does the gas come together? Well, there's this cloud of hydrogen gas, and then
it just is.
Somehow there's a point in there, and everything starts to gather and gets compacted. Except they know their own science states that the proton electromagnetic field repulsive force is many orders of magnitude stronger than the gravitational force that is supposedly used to contract the hydrogen into stars. It's virtually impossible for a hydrogen cloud on its own to condense into a star. So I says, well, you got to have something. You need something, a gravitational source, and the perfect gravitational source, obviously, is neutronium. So what I'm saying is our sun has a solid neutronium core. All stars have solid neutronium cores. And when a neutronium core sphere, which comes from the Big Bang, which was a huge neutronium device, it not only shot out all this neutronium or neutron gas, which turned into hydrogen perfectly as designed. So I have a reason why neutrons do this now. It's just not just some random magical thing that happens. It was designed that way on purpose so that we can create a universe, or God can create a universe. And so when that the neutron gas comes out, within 15 minutes, we have huge amounts of hydrogen. The neutronium spheres that also came out of all different sizes, came out spinning rapidly, gathered the gas, gathered the atmosphere around this neutronium star. And once it had enough gas, it just lights up and the fusion process begins. This is the sun source. The neutronium spheres are the star source, or the sun source of this universe. Every star has them. And guess what? Every planet has one. That means the Earth has a neutronium core. So when I realized this, I got a little nervous. So I says, well, if there's a neutronium core in the Earth, then there's going to be a nuclear process going on, fusion process. That means that there should be neutrinos coming out of the center of the Earth. So thanks to the internet, I found the Japanese scientist who turned his neutrino detector toward the center of the Earth. And he found neutrinos coming from the center of the Earth. Wow. So there's only one or two possibilities. There's fission, which a lot of people claim, but fission couldn't have lasted this long. The half-life, they should have ended billions of years ago. It should have cooled down, but it's not cooling down. Have you noticed all the volcanoes lately? Yeah. They're really hot, and there's a lot of them. And if you look at the Earth's crust, it's cracked all over the place. It's unstable. We have a bit of a large neutronium spinning core, and it's generating it's creating all the elements. How do you think all the elements got here? Only way to make elements, gold, silver, lead, gases, hydrogen, well, not hydrogen, but helium, and everything thereafter, carbon, has to come from a fusion process. And look, planet Earth has every element on it already. You think they just fell out of the sky? I don't think so. They were made right here in the center of the Earth. And over time, it was mixed up, pushed to the surface, comes out in volcanoes, whatever. Again, another theory that makes solid sense. Perfect. And if we could do some experiments to detect, and the ones that I've seen says there's something solid in the sun. The NASA has done some experiments where they use radar to measure the motion of the gases around the sun. And as you get toward the center, the motion becomes one, as if there's something solid inside of it. This is confirmed, rock solid evidence by NASA themselves, which they refuse to acknowledge that there's a solid something inside it. Although the data says there is, well, we just can't go there. It must be just gas that's really compressed. What's holding it together? There's 100 million explosions every second, hydrogen bombs going off. How is that being held together? Gas alone can't do it. Obviously, there's a very strong gravitational source holding all that together. And so it's going to take some time, but this one I'm very, very sure eventually they'll come around and say, yeah, there's a neutronium core in stars.
You would think that they would have to come around to everything you're saying because it all makes far too much sense and explains everything.
The evidence is there. Every time we see a supernova, what's left? Either a neutron star or a black hole. All I'm saying is it was already there. All the supernova just blew off the atmosphere because it became so unstable that it could no longer hold the gases, and boom, in a big cosmic chain reaction, which is what's going on, it got so hot and blast was so great that it can no longer hold the gases and blew away from the star. And this happens when you run out of hydrogen and helium. Each stage, it gets hotter and hotter. And sometimes the neutronium core can't hold that together and you get a supernova. Then you see what was there all along, what created the star in the first place. All I'm saying is things that make sense, rock solid sense. And it's frustrating for me to say, hey, you're letting this Yahoo from nowhere figure all this stuff out. Come on.
You've had money and time and all these people, like, come on.
Think about this stuff. Get your heads out of the sand. I love you scientists, I love you physicists, but dadgummit, let's start coming up with some theories that make sense and are provable. And I'm providing that to you. And here I am, I'm doing my part to tell you about it, explain it as detailed and as thoroughly as I can. But it's up to you. I'm taking you to the water. You need to drink the water now.
Yeah, come on. I love it. I love this feeling, and I feel like it's going to pick up and catch momentum. I'm actually very excited about that. And I just have such a random question that I don't know if it connects to anything we're talking about, but what do you think the moon is?
Well, I've given that a little thought. there's a lot of different theories. It came from a collision and, broke off from the Earth. I don't think that's it. I think even moons have very small neutronium cores. Huh. The key thing to realize, and I poked around the internet asking this questions, how small can a neutronium sphere be?
Yeah.
Because that's critical. If it can get like the size of a tennis ball, then it can, maybe that's all there is, because that's immensely heavy. A tennis ball of neutronium is hundreds and hundreds of metric tons of weight. I mean, you couldn't hold it. It would fall right through your hand, right to the center of the Earth. Neutronium is really dense, way more than gold and, anything we have here. And so you don't need a whole lot of neutronium to make a moon. But you notice all these things are basically spherical. So a neutronium sphere is always spherical. It's not going to be any other shape. So the matter and energy are just conveniently compacted into this spherical shape, because that's the shape that gravity puts out, basically, is a nice homogeneous field that contracts other matter. I think the Earth was once a very small brown dwarf star, as was Saturn and Jupiter and the moons. And when they burn that fuel out, the crust forms, cools, and then it's still burning inside like the Earth. We got one that's really cooking big time. But even the other planets still have some plate tectonics going on, and maybe, ancient volcanoes that have gone cool. If they have smaller neutronium cores, the core to crust ratio is such that they become very stable, and they die out basically. And all you have is this rapidly spinning thing in there, fusing the heavier elements basically till the end of time, when it just can't really fuse anything else, and the star system dies out probably before that even happens. But I believe the moon is probably a smaller, very small neutronium sphere, and it gathered its own gases. It made it not enough to hold an atmosphere. It's so small and so light. But I just got to believe that the system is pretty consistent throughout. All the spheres that are out there, whether they be planets or satellites of planets and so forth, probably all have various sized neutronium spheres in the center.
And how would two neutronium spheres interact with each other? I mean, I guess that's what we're seeing, right? Is they're spinning around each other? Okay. And if you saw like some of these satellites and moons that are not very super spherical, like maybe it was Phobos or something that's kind of like elliptical more?
Some, at a certain level, some are just
getting
happen because of collisions. So you got these oddly shaped things floating around. They're a few miles wide, 10, 15, 20. That's certainly possible, especially if a planet were to explode, which is the theory that is going about, or has been going about for many decades now, that the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter was actually a planet that became unstable and exploded. And what's left is that asteroid belt.
So it wasn't the Death Star. It was the internal problem.
Well, it may have brought about the birth of the Nemesis. I don't know if you know what that is.
Why? It sounds familiar, but I can't remember.
It's a rogue, either a rogue star or a rogue planet that they think has a very odd orbit. And, that's like millions of years. And when it comes in, it disrupts everything in our solar system, because of its heavy gravitational field. It moves about the asteroids in the asteroid belt and messes with planets and so forth, and causes cataclysmic things to happen. That's Nemesis.
Okay. And that's part of people think that perhaps Saturn was a lot closer in its own star, and like we had a completely different atmosphere, and colors of things would have been different and all of that.
Oh yeah, long ago. Yeah, the Earth was not at all inhabitable in the early days. It was just a molten rock. And it takes billions of years for all of the things to evolve to the point where life is created. And that process is so poorly understood that I believe there's a spiritual component to the creation of life. It just can't completely randomly happen on its own. I am sure that, see, I'm a theist, so I not only believe that God created the universe, but God is personally involved in everyone's existence, and not only everyone in everything, right down to the atomic level. In other words, you are at the center of God's attention. I am at the center of God's attention. Every grain of sand on every planet, everywhere in the universe, is at the center of God's attention. I know that's inconceivable for a finite, limited people like ourselves to try to think about. But as NDE people have said when they've gotten to the other side, they were capable of feeling and sensing and knowing these things. I'm talking about knowledge on a level that you can't get from just words like we're using to impart information and knowledge. This pathetically primitive method. Just knowing and getting knowledge infused into you is so much more complete and thorough, and provides such great understanding. God does this naturally, and when we get there, when we reconnect with that side, we have this ability to sense, you go through all your lifetimes in an instant. You're doing things that you can never imagine our primitive brain doing here. It's an amazing device, but it's very limited, and that's by design, so that we can experience things like suffering and difficulty and challenge, which you can't get on the other side. I guess it gets kind of boring over there, maybe, but here it's not boring. You could say a lot of things, but life is not boring unless you make it that way.
Right, you can make it that way, but it's not naturally that way.
Really challenging. It's very interesting, and that is by design.
I love that. Yeah, I definitely feel the same, and I feel like it's somewhat obvious too that how would we get from like an amoeba to this, right? If there wasn't some directed intention involved from our souls, or whatever you want to call that.
The evidence is there again in NDEs. I've read some and saw some testimony from very credible people who died. This one lady, Anita, I think was her name, died of cancer. I mean, terminal. She went to her last breath and had no hope, died, had a near-death experience. While she was there, he says, you're going to come back. You're going to be all right. The cancer is going to go away. Now, who did that?
Yeah.
Not going to do that on its own. Now, God said that he's going to take care of that, and he did. That means that he messed with something on the molecular level. That's intelligent design in its purest form.
Right.
That means the spiritual realm can control our matter and energy at will.
Agreed. And I feel like we have plenty of evidence that we have that same power, albeit on a much maybe smaller or narrower scale or channel. But that intention and that visualization do affect and create reality too. So if everybody listening out there right now imagines and visualizes you getting this message out and this book out to whoever, and them seeing it and actually considering it and taking it and going, perhaps let's look into this more instead of rejecting it, that would be really cool. So everybody could do that right now. Give a little boost to the project.
Go.
Yeah.
Go Earth. Team God.
I have a million things to ask, but I've written them all down, and so now they're all just a glob of words on my paper. Like you said, words are the least likely thing to actually
Fire
help.
away.
But
I love these discussions. These are great discussions. This is what people really are longing to hear. They want to know what the hell is going on here.
Yeah.
What is going on? Trying to figure it out. I mean, that's what I'm when I tune into these NDEs and stuff like this, I'm looking for the clues. That's what it's really all about. My book was just a series of clues that I put together and saw patterns. Recognizing the patterns, I made the links and then came up with a sensible theory of how everything worked. And since you believe in intelligent design, you know it's all a part of a bigger plan that's going to make sense. It's not going to be random stuff. And I don't see that anymore. I don't see anything random. I only see the appearance of random, pseudo-random type things that are going on. And that only occurs when we just don't understand.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think that's part of why people like discussions like this too, is because we all just instinctively or inherently understand that like things should make more sense than this. Why would there be all of these guesses and these missing pieces and these things that don't connect? Like that's not part of our experience. It's not how we just innately get what's going on. But you talk about this new age that we're maybe moving into, this new age in the future, and what is your idea about that? Does that have something to do with how the universe is collapsing and we're moving towards these black holes or Newtonian spheres?
I want us, the planet Earth, to form a utopian society based on the technology I bring forth. The technology will connect us to other cultures and other parts of the universe. More advanced species, doesn't always mean better, but there will be a class of beings that will almost be like gods to us, and that there will be so spiritually, technologically advanced, it'll seem, they'll be great teachers, let's just say. When we can hear about their religion, which is going to be a universal type of religion, they're going to realize that they are as special as we are. We're not the center of the universe. They're not the center of the universe, but that we are all at the center of God's attention. And God is involved in us and personally in our lives. And so I want that kinds of information to come into our society and to start building. I want it to be taught in schools. I want children to know that they come from a place they call home, and they'll go back to that someday when they finish what they came here to do. And everybody gets a task, and it's up to you to remember that life plan that you agreed to and were born into. And once you get that done, you will succeed, and your rewards on the other side will be great. Now, if you want to come here and just play around, fool around, that's fine too. There's no judgment really from what I can see on the other side, which is good. It's comforting, All right, you've made some mistakes. Clearly, you will see them in your life review. And next time, maybe you'll get that right. You'll get that better. There'll always be another chance on another planet somewhere here or somewhere else. The sooner you make the willful choice to do good, be virtuous, and work for the greater good, the better off and the more happier and healthier our culture and society will be. So my idea is to bring about the anti-gravity technology so that we can have the spacecraft to go to other planets. We meet these other cultures, because we can't depend on the government. That they're going to keep it secret for as long as they can. It's just the way they work. I wish they could just stop that and say, it would be beneficial that we expand this technology. We bring in all these other companies, let them start building and these spaceships. We can have supercars. Imagine being able to travel. I do this. I daydream about this all the time. I get in my supercar and I take my wife and we go to Tahiti. If I wanted to go to Tahiti from Florida, it would take me like 2 days. If I'm lucky, if I make all my flights and everything. Imagine being able to go there in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You take your picnic lunch, your cooler and everything. You go there, you spend, 4 or 5 hours, you come home, you have some dinner, you go to bed, next day you go to Paris for breakfast, Rome for lunch, and then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're back home for a nap. This is all doable. I'm talking about a freedom like we've never seen before. This is all good stuff. This will be someday. And that's what my book is about. That's what I'm trying to bring about. But it's going to take a colossal amount of effort on my part to make this happen, because I got to convince a lot of people. And I got to help them to take action. And most of those people are scientists. So I need those physicists to snap out of it and let's get with it.
Yeah, we need to free them from their cult so they can be help us all.
Stop with the particle accelerators. Oh, we need to build another one. The last one cost $8 billion. What are you going to do with this one? You're going to build a 20 billion one, and you're going to find a few more particles. And what is that going to do for us? Yeah. It's really not going to do anything more, because the whole standard model is a kludge, and it's not helpful to our advancement. What I'm trying to do is help us evolve and advance, and we have to get the truth out about the unified field theory and about anti-gravity, and meeting new cultures and exploring new planets and getting a second or third planet colonized out there. We can find something out there that we can either come into an agreement with the people that are there already. If there's no people there, then we could just colonize that place, and just in case something goes wrong here, because in 4.5 billion years, we're going to fall into the great attractor and it's going to be over. And if that doesn't get us, the sun is going to run out of hydrogen. And when that happens, we're going to get cooked. Yeah. And that might be maybe 4 billion years away, but it may be sooner, because I just told you earlier that the sun has a neutronium core, and maybe 10% of its mass is neutronium. That means that we have 10% less hydrogen to burn, which means it's going to burn out sooner than we think. So maybe we need to get going on this and get these interstellar spacecraft built and get us to some other planet, just in case something goes wrong.
I love that. I know, that we have a lot of forces that have the exact seemingly opposite view and vision as you at the future, which is unfortunate. And so I wonder if you have already experienced, hopefully not any sort of suppression, or just sort of some people or some forces trying to stop you from progressing, if you've noticed anything like that. And go ahead.
I have been warned about that, and I've taken actions to prevent that. Good. And I have not. I've listened to the advice instead of not listening to the advice, as I have done in the past. You'll see in my next book times when I didn't listen, and it almost cost me my life.
Wow.
Now I've learned to listen.
Good.
And I've taken it, and it's working out just as was predicted. So, for whatever reasons, I'm being left alone, and I'm happy. Well, I'm not really talking against the government. I'm not really revealing their secrets. I'm just saying this is what I think based on the information that is already out there.
Right.
That everybody knows about already. Airline pilots flying over Area 51. Well, they see lights coming from deep space and stopping right over the airfield and then landing. That's knowledge that's been out there. I've talked to other people that have seen UFOs close up, and those UFOs had markings on them, and those markings were in English. And they said United States Air Force, experimental. And I know this person was for real.
Yeah.
So now I know. We got him. we got them. So some of those Tic Tacs or whatever might be our own people, just seeing how we react to this technology. Let's see how the Navy pilots react when we have a swarm of them all around them. What are they going to do? Let's see how their systems respond. The radar, can they detect us? Can they track us? Can they shoot at us? And what can they do? So it could be our people, it could be Russians. For all we know, Russians and the Chinese have captured their own crashed UFOs and reverse engineered it, and they're not talking about it either. Everybody's not talking. This is not good. We need to start talking.
Yeah. Well, I often wonder whether this whole flat Earth movement and flat Earth idea is its own psyop to sort of keep people more easily controlled in a way, which is the opposite of what some flat Earth people think. But I just like to think of every possibility, and that would, fit in with the suppression of these types of ideas that seems to be going on as well. And so I don't know if you've thought about that.
There is a lot of suppression going around. It disturbs me. I like the truth to get out, and I think anybody that opposes that for whatever political reason or whatever is not a good thing. It's just going to keep us. It's going to hold us back, and it usually leads to cultures or civilizations to fail. The more you corrupt it, the closer it becomes becoming dysfunctional. Because you have a group of people that are feeding the corruption who are corrupted, and then that grows to the point where it's unstable, and there's how do you call it, a correction, or what's another word, reckoning. That happens, and it's kind of a natural process. You could say the earth is doing it or God is doing it, but like the Nazis, they were getting very, very powerful, and then somehow things came together with the rest of the world. They got shut down. The Romans were great and powerful. They became corrupt. They collapsed. There's probably hundreds of civilizations that have went through this very similar process where they do bad. You do enough bad stuff, there's always a reckoning. There's always a debt that comes due, and you can't escape it. So the tighter they squeeze, the more will slip through their fingers. It's not going to work. They may think it's going to work. It may make them feel good about it, but in the end, it's gonna, somewhere down the road, 50 or 100 years from now, things will just go bad. And let's face it, our infrastructure is very easily disrupted.
It's tenuous, yeah.
Yeah, it's very tenuous. It's a few nicks here and there, and things collapse in a hurry. And then next thing you know, people aren't getting food, and their power goes off, and they're not gonna like that. So we got to be careful. We always should be working toward helping each other, loving each other, caring for each other. These are the things. Whenever you're doing something that takes away from somebody else, that is evil by definition. That which takes away from life is evil.
Very simple, and yet so often misunderstood. Absolutely with you. And I guess we've talked around and around and around the book and never actually talked about the book itself. So why don't you share with us the book and what it's about, and also where people can find it, and all of that good stuff. What's the best way for people to get it? People in the chat are ready to get it. So what's the best way for them to get it?
Doesn't show my super duper background.
Yeah.
There it is. Just a little bit.
Master of Reality.
Master of Reality. It's at my website, www.super-relativity.com. And there's links on the front page, right up front. Once you get to the main page, it'll take you to Amazon. You can get it there. And as long as supplies last, I can send you a signed book as well. And so those are the two places you can get it. And I have a blog there, which I answer some more questions like we talked about tonight. I try to keep that updated. I haven't gotten anything lately because I've been so busy, but I'm writing this paper, which is incredibly important. I want to get that out so I can move on and start my next book. That's it, basically, www.super-relativity.com. That's everything there. I got some videos. I got my book trailer there. Check it out. It's a good looking book trailer.
That's exciting. I know there's people in the chat too who are going to use it in their homeschool curriculum now, so that's really exciting too.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I love the option of getting a signed copy. I do that with my books too, and I just like I'm gonna get a signed copy if there's any left by the time I get there, because it's just more fun that way.
Yeah, that's nice.
A little added connection. I guess we've already talked about what your hope for where things go from here is, and is there anything that you want to share with the audience that you would like, to ask them to do or to think about, or any final thoughts that you want to leave them with, or things that we didn't touch on that you want to throw out there?
Yes. I have also a speech made up, PowerPoint thing, which I'm going to give to some scientists at some point. Not quite ready for that yet. This paper comes out first, then that speech comes out. The whole point of the paper is to prove the unification of force, the origin of mass, gravity, and inertia. That'll get everybody's attention. Why? So I can talk about anti-gravity. That's the thing I'm pushing for, because we need that technology. So if you're a person, a scientist, a physicist, or one who does experiments, I want you to do experiments with magnetism in order to detect how gravity can be canceled. And I'm going to give you an extra boost in your experimentation, not just a stationary magnetic field. This magnetic field must be accelerated. This enhances the anti-gravity effect. So these are the kinds of experiments, and I have some at the back of my book I described that you could, use. And we're going to prove for sure, so that scientists can accept that anti-gravity exists instead of thinking about it like it's, science fiction. It's not real, it doesn't exist, and never will. We've got to break that attitude, and we got to bring this into physical being. That's what I'm trying to do, and it's for everybody's good. There's nobody going to be left out or left behind in this deal. This is for everyone, and it's a good thing, and we need to do it. As long as we don't try to build weapons with it, I'm not about weapons. I'm not interested in weapons. I don't care about global domination or control. I just want to make this place a better place. And this is how I'm doing it. This is my task. This is what I was assigned to do. And this is how I'm going to do it. So there you go. That's the whole plan in a nutshell.
I love it. It's a beautiful plan. It's as elegant as the solution you have found to the unified field theory. And thank you so much for bringing us all that energy and all of that thought. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. And this has been your analog electric concentric dose of wisdom, according to the far seer Mark Fiorentino. Mark, thank you so much for sharing with us tonight and for everything that you do.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Telepathy, teleportation, psychic phenomenon, strange encounters that can't be easily explained via materialist science. None of this is truly extrasensory or extra dimensional. It's all happening right here, right now. And every single one of us is a part of it, woven into the very fabric of everything that exists as an integral piece. Every single one of us is capable of sensing and interacting with the subtle forces and energies at work in this realm. And there isn't an aspect of life or of the universe that we are not intimately connected with. And there isn't a micromolecule of it that we can't come to understand. Let the mind of God be one with your mind. Let the knowledge of yourself as a beautiful piece of a cosmic symphony come to the surface. And until you see yourself as both the cloth and the weaver, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
Domestic terrorists.
They're not wearing masks.
Domestic terrorists. It's that basic, it's that simple.
And the question is, how are we going to really almost deprogram these people?
These extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians.
They're not wearing masks.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. Oversensitize them to what we have to do.
Potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
We've made it our mission to limit the spread of this disease and to limit the risks to lives and to our economy. We've been clear from the beginning that getting together in groups outside of your household that is not permitted is not allowed. I'ma have a lava lamp in my FEMA camp. I'ma have a lava lamp in my FEMA camp. I'ma have a lava lamp in my FEMA camp. I'ma have a lava lamp in my FEMA camp.
And we need to make it clear to them that the vaccine is the ticket back to pre-pandemic life. And the window to do that is really narrowing.
This nation, this idea called America, was and always will be a new world. Our new world.
Today we're taking steps to confront not just the gun crisis, but what is actually a public health crisis.
They're not wearing masks.
You know the old expression about snitches? Well, in this case, snitches get rewards. We want to thank you for turning folks in and making sure we are all safe.
Are you proposing taking away their guns, and how would this work? I am. I'ma have a lava lamp in my FEMA camp. I'ma have a lava lamp in my FEMA camp. I'ma have a lava lamp in my FEMA camp. I'ma have a lava lamp